Hello, everybody. Hola y buenos días. So, this video is going to be one of a few different videos that we're going to upload today, which will be taking the place of our regularly scheduled class time. The first thing that we're going to be talking about is formal versus informal address in Spanish. You will find examples of the phrases in the textbook that we have for formal greetings and informal greetings. These are going to be on pages 4 through 7 of your textbook. Pages 4 through 7. As we mentioned in class, the dialogues that you see on those pages will have examples of situaciones formales and situaciones informales. Situaciones formales, formal situations versus situaciones informales. Okay, so formal versus informal situations. First of all, we should stop and think about, in English, how do we know when we're speaking formally versus informally to somebody? Normally, we would speak formally when we're talking to someone who's older than ourselves, an elder. We would speak formally to somebody in a work-related situation. Sometimes you would speak formally to somebody at the university. For example, people may speak formally to their professors. They may speak formally to administrators. They may speak formally to their advisors. Those are just some examples of university situations that could be considered formal. Some people might speak formally also in certain social situations where you don't know the person you're speaking to very well. Let's write new people. So those are all good examples of when we might use formal address like sir, ma'am, professor, doctor, president, things like that. Whenever you use a title with somebody, you can pretty much bet that you are speaking formally. So title is a very good indicator. Mr., Mrs., Miss, all of those types of titles. So now, informal situations in English. Classmates, generally you're informal with your classmates. You're informal with your friends. Informal with your pets, your close family. Other situations that we would consider informal in English might be when you're speaking with a group of people who are close to your own age. Or perhaps people who are younger than you. And people who you're on a first-name basis with. Versus using a title as in the formal situations. Okay, so that's just a very good overall view of formal versus informal. Let's scroll down a little bit. Now, let's make a list of some of the phrases that we have in our textbook that indicate a formal versus informal conversation. One of the indicators that you noticed in the textbook would be the use, as we said before, of somebody's title. So, for example, señor, señorita, señora. There's other titles that you may have seen, like profesor, profesora. You'll notice that profesor, ending in a consonant, is a male professor. Profesora, ending in an a vowel, is a female professor. Profesor, the masculine form, is basically your default go-to form. When you're referring to a female in Spanish, you will call her profesora. You'll add an a to the end. We will definitely get into a lot more of gender and number in the future as we move along in Spanish. For right now, we're just going to say profesor is male, profesora is female, as in señor is male, señorita and señora are female. Other indicators of a formal conversation would be the use of the word usted. In Spanish, usted literally means you, but formal singular you. As if you were speaking to the president of the university, Dr. Rice, and you were asking Dr. Rice, how are you today? ¿Cómo está usted? So usted, formal singular you. And that phrase that we just used, ¿Cómo está usted? In this phrase, we already talked about usted meaning you, formal, but the verb está means you are. That is the formal form of the verb estar, formal singular. We will definitely get into more detail about that later as well. Other formal phrases might be to greet somebody with buenos días, buenas tardes, buenas noches, those are all a little bit more formal than just saying hi, right? Other phrases that you'll remember in your textbook would be, ¿Cómo se llama usted? And remember, anytime we see usted, we know we're speaking formally with somebody. Se llama is what's called a reflexive verb. This question is asking a singular person formally, what is your name? Or literally, how do you call yourself? That is exactly how this translates into English. You calling yourself is reflexive, meaning the action of the verb is happening to yourself. You're doing something to yourself. Don't get too concerned about that. Just remember that when you ask somebody their name, you need two parts of the verb, se llama. Now, let's catch up on our informal side. At the top of the list, we saw señor, señorita, señora. Those are titles, just as profesor, profesora. We're going to kind of combine those all together, and we can write first name right over here on the informal side. Because if you're informal with somebody, you don't necessarily always use their title, right? You're more on a Bill or Judy or Jaime basis with that person. Now, as we move down the list to usted, there is an informal equivalent of you formal, and you informal in Spanish is tú. That means you informal singular. If you see tú in a sentence, you know you're speaking informally to somebody. Now, the informal equivalent of ¿Cómo está usted? Is ¿Cómo estás? And of course, you can put tú in there if you want, but honestly, tú is not necessary in this sentence. We'll deal a little bit more with that once we reach verbs in Spanish and learning how to say I, he, she, we. Those are called subject pronouns. For the moment, the important thing to be able to recognize is, first of all, usted is formal, tú is informal, and the verb está, whether or not you see usted by it, está is formal and estás is informal. The S on the end of the verb indicates informal. Okay, now continuing down the list, you have on the formal side, buenos días, buenas tardes, buenas noches, and of course you can say these phrases with your friends, right? But a lot of times, when we're speaking with our friends, we don't always greet them as good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Lots of times we just say hi, right? So, hola. Hola is a really nice generic hi for someone who you're familiar with. Or anybody really, but it's not quite at the level of formality as saying buenas tardes to somebody. So hola is a generic and informal greeting. There's also what's happening, right? ¿Qué tal? There's other variations. You can say ¿qué hay? Some people say ¿qué hubo? ¿Qué onda? There's a lot of ways you can ask what's up or what's going on. Let's come down to the last sentence, ¿Cómo se llama usted? On the formal side, I want to give you the informal equivalent of this. Informal is ¿Cómo te llamas? You will notice, just like when we were talking about ¿Cómo está usted? Versus ¿Cómo estás tú? The verbs are different. Se llama is a verb. Te llamas is also a verb. Remember that the te goes with tú. The se goes with usted. And once again, you have an S on the end of llamas. Okay, this is a pretty good general introduction to formal versus informal in Spanish. I'm not going to cover every single item in the textbook because we're going to review some of that together. I just wanted to make sure that everybody's kind of on the right track, okay? So let's go ahead. I'm going to close this video out for the moment, and we're going to come back with another video, okay? So give me just a moment, and I will be back.